Good morning. Or I don't know what time. I'm assuming it's probably late afternoon or early evening for you. Is that right, Jonas?
Yeah, it's 6 o'clock p.m. here in Sweden.
Sweden. Okay, I was good. I couldn't remember exactly which. I knew you were in Scandinavia, but I wasn't sure. I have no Swedish ability, so we'll have to. I hope you'll do this in English for me.
Absolutely.
Hey, I like the shirt. I like that. I like the leopard print. That's not real leopard skin, is it? I mean, I will trigger some people if it is, but
No, I hope not. This is, I think this is an H&M shirt,
okay,
Swedish
okay.
brand. So yeah,
Very good.
I like it as well. Thanks.
It looks
It's summer colors.
It looks comfortable. Awesome. Anyway, well, Jonas, thank you again for doing this. I can't remember who sort of led me to you, but you're an impressive athlete and doing some things, and you're not a vegan, I understand, which is I can't believe that you can be an athlete without being a vegan, according to the latest propaganda we're hearing. But tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I'm an endurance athlete, and I started doing triathlons in my late teens. Triathlon was a very small fringe sport in Sweden at the time, so probably going back some 30 years, I was a competitive swimmer. Went into triathlon, had no idea what I was doing since it was such a small minuscule sport, and I just sort of taught myself how to run and to bike, and I became a professional triathlete in my early 20s, and went on to win a few World Championship and European Championship medals. I went to Hawaii and did the ultra distance, sort of the Ultraman World Championship triathlon, held over 3 days, and I won that twice. And basically I had a 15-year professional endurance career, and from that I learned so many things that I bring with me as I'm now heading into my 50s, and I've spent the 10 years after my professional career doing a variety of endurance charities. I did really long swimming adventure in Sweden, and I just these days enjoy much more to train and exercise for my longevity and my long-term health. I'm a father now to two small kids, so that's my driving force, is to be able to exercise and to enjoy things with them when I'm probably in my 60s and they're in their teens.
I hear you. I've got a bunch of small kids as well. I mean, my
Yeah,
oldest is 15. My youngest is 8.5, going to turn 9 at the end of the
right.
year. And so I'm in my mid 50s, and same sort of goal is to be there, not only to be able to play with the kids, but actually to be able to beat those kids.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Still be functional. And so, and by the way, if you're approaching 50s, you look like you're in tremendous shape. So good on you for doing that. There's not a lot of folks approaching 50, unfortunately, and I think that's a real sad statement, that most people, as they get into their 40s and 50s, have just fallen apart for the most part. So it's you've already sort of distinguished yourself in the vast minority, which is, in my view, should be the majority. We should all be running and performing well, and maybe not
Sure.
at world-class
Sure.
level.
But I also I did probably for every 5 years I've made an overhaul of my diet and my training, and I think that there are so many former athletes, and I can only speak for the sort of the community that I meet in Sweden, and there are so many former athletes that know how to push themselves and work out hard, and they're so used to being uncomfortable and in pain, and it's not a certainty that you're also going to grow older with sort of dignity just because you had a great sporting athletic career. I mean, you could be a great soccer player, for instance, and 10 years after your professional career, you pretty much have lost all your fitness and you look like any sort of older guy. And so I attribute my sort of current health status, or whatever you'd call it, more to being able to shift gears as I age, in terms, I mean, regarding diet and exercise, and maybe not so much the 15-20 years that I spent as an elite athlete. So and that's something I also lecture quite a lot about in Sweden these days, the difference between performance and health, the difference between sports and life. So, you know, my goal today is to be fit for life. When people ask me what I train for, you know, my answer is always life. I'd love to do a triathlon or a swim run or any endurance thing that I can, you know, get in and perform well at, but that's something that's on the sidelines on my main goal, which is to be fit and strong and functional and pain-free for as long as I can.
Yeah, I mean, and your point about a lot of, and I've had the fortune to work with a lot of Olympic gold medalists that have been retired, and honestly, I was kind of unimpressed. They were out of shape, and I said, "You used to be the world
Sure.
champion, now you're 50 pounds overweight." That to me was a little wake-up call. I just don't know that I could let myself go that way. But I can understand when you've pushed it so hard as an elite athlete, and you've kind of beaten the world. You don't want to continue to do that after a period of time. It's so stressful on your body. But let me ask you about, because your point about being fit for life, I mean, elite athletes are elite athletes. By definition, there's only going to be a very small percentage of people that are ever going to be elite athletes. That's why they're elite athletes. It's less than 1% of the population, maybe even one-tenth of 1%. So for all of us, the majority of us that just want to be as healthy and feel good and function. So what kind of things are you learning, whether nutrition, whether exercise, whether lifestyle stuff that have sort of been beneficial for you?
Well, one thing that I think is, training and exercise, first of all, I think continuity is key to everything. As you get older, also the ability not hurting yourself. I mean, being smart about your training, putting your ego aside is also very important. I mean, the only person that I'm trying to impress is, you know, myself. You know, if you're going to impress someone, just by being disciplined and having continuity in life. So, and I also changed up a lot of my training over the years. I think, like you mentioned, hurting yourself, or I mean, you know, pushing yourself a lot. And I think that, for instance, endurance training is awesome for a lot of things. But I also think there are so many other aspects of being athletic, more than just being able to go for a really long time, whether it be swimming, cycling, running, or cross-country skiing. So these days I incorporate more strength training in my workouts than I did when I was younger. I spend a lot more time in the gym, and I really enjoy it. I do a lot more. I have a much more bigger variety of my disciplines of training. For instance, I love doing stand-up paddleboard, which I do basically every day in the summer now. I do a lot of cross-country skiing in the wintertime, and I don't do as much hard training as I did, like in terms of really long workouts or very, very hard taxing workouts. I'll do a lot of intermediate workouts, like I'll do 60 to 90 minutes, which for some people will sound really hard or really long, but I just do it as like I'll be able to hold a conversation if I'm having a training partner. It's kind of it's not a leisurely pace, but it's not a painful pace either. I just want to exercise a few hours every day without hurting myself and just gaining the long-term benefits. And adding strength training. I do the strength workout really, really hard. I mean, I wouldn't be able to lift half the weights that you lift, but I still push myself. For being an endurance athlete, I try to sort of max out a lot of exercises that I do. In terms of the diet, though, I was very early in Sweden with adopting the sort of the low carb, high fat that came around 20 years ago. And it was actually pretty big. The low carb, high fat movement was very influential in Sweden in the early, like around the millennium shift. And there were a lot of influential Swedish doctors that made the transition. And it was very controversial in Sweden for quite some time. And I had come in contact with an American author, lecturer, coach called Phil Maffetone, and he wrote a book around 1994, I think. And this book was called In Fitness and in Health. And for me, that was an eye-opening book, because I had never come in contact with any medical professional that outright said, try to keep sugar consumption to a minimum and increase fats. I had never come in contact with anyone that explained the concept of stress to me, how the hormonal, how the endocrinical system works, like what kind of nutrients do your hormones need in order to function? How do you regulate stress? How do you balance life with exercise and so forth? So very early in my career, I adopted the notion that maybe all this sugar and all these carbs and all this flour, all this bread, all the cereals that you're taught to eat as an athlete in Sweden, all the huge bowls of porridge that you're expected to eat in the morning, maybe all these things aren't good for you, or it's not optimum for you. I mean, maybe a lot of athletes perform really good, not despite what they eat. It's not because they eat all the cereals and stuff. Maybe they perform well despite the fact that they eat all this. So it was a very controversial way to think for me. And early in it, around 2001, 2002, I did a lot of shifts in my diet, and I gravitated more and more and more to eating sort of carnivore-ish, high-fat foods. I started fasting at least one day every week, 24 hours, some 10 years ago, and it's probably been the best habit that I've adopted that has, I think, increased the longevity of my athletic abilities. And basically over the past 2-3 years, I've gravitated even more into the sort of carnivore diet, and I've been a very outspoken proponent, against the vegan society community. And I have a podcast in Sweden which is fairly popular, and we're trying to keep a sensible sort of I don't know if it's a debate or not, but we're trying to be very pro meat and very sort of anti-vegan without being too demonizing. I mean, really trying to connect with people to communicate these theses.
Yeah, Jonas, I want to just, the one point you made, and actually we're speaking with Zach Bitterdeman. You may know Zach. He's a world record holder in the 100 mile.
Mm-hmm.
He's also a low carb athlete and kind of meat heavy.
Right.
The one point he made up is, he says people have been told for 50 years, since some of the research in Scandinavia talked about carb loading in the late 1960s, that you must eat carbs to be successful, and therefore all athletes try that. And so what happens is the ones that are able to do that successfully succeed. And you're just basically saying, if everybody's using this paradigm, some people are going to be successful at it. Some people might have done better in another route. And I think it's as simple as that. And the other point that you bring up is that, the fasting. I'm curious about how you handle your training around fasting. The fasting day a rest day? Is it a light day? Is it a hard, intense training day? How do you roll fasting in with your training scenario? And how would you do that if you were competing at a high level? Would you continue to fast one day a week if you were saying, I want to win the world championship in Ironman again or something like that? How would you incorporate fasting?
Yeah, great questions. I don't know if you know this, but in Sweden, the cornerstone of endurance sports is cross-country skiing in Sweden, and it's a very narrow paradigm around this sport. And I actually made a joke, several years ago. If you have 100 athletes eating porridge, one of them is going to win, which means you're going to have a porridge eating winner, obviously. And this paradigm is so strong in Sweden, and all the sponsors associated with cross-country skiing really influenced the entire endurance sports community, and in turn also the general information about eating, because all these cross-country skiers have been sort of national heroes, and everyone knows what they're eating for breakfast, and everyone is talking about you need to carb load, and you need to load up, and you need to eat sugar before, during, and after any type of exercise, or you're going to be totally, and so when I started sort of promoting more of a high fat, low carb diet, it was very controversial. But we actually did have an Olympic gold medalist in biathlon, which is a very sort of strange sport, I guess, for a lot of Americans. But this is the combination of cross-country skiing and rifling, shooting. I mean, you do a cross-country course, and you have a shotgun on the back of your on a ski dress, and there was this guy that actually won the gold medal in one of the distances in the Olympics in 2010. And from that point on, a lot of the endurance athletes in Sweden became, and he was on a low carb, high fat diet. So a lot of athletes in Sweden sort of gained notice that maybe this is something that you can actually perform on. So by the time I started doing a lot of public speaking and telling people about that, I was also doing fasting, and this was a good idea. It did provoke a lot of people, because they thought I was actually promoting starvation, as the common notion in Sweden has always been, you need to eat 3 times a day, and you need to have snacks in between, and the solution for every problem health-wise is to eat more and more often, which is very strange. So it's sort of the fasting has really improved both my training and my performance, I think. And over the past 10 years, it's gained a lot of notoriety in Sweden. Obviously, through the 5-2 diet, which has been, very popular. And over time, anytime I do my public speaking engagement, basically, if I ask a room full of people whether or not they tried fasting or they incorporate it, probably, half of all guys will lift their hands, and maybe 1/4 of the women in the room will say that they actually indeed have tried it, and that they're enjoying it very much. So today is a fasting day. Actually, Mondays are typically my fasting day. So I go from Sunday night to Monday night without any food. I drink water and some coffee, and I do exercise just as I would any other day. Actually, and this is not me trying to pat my own back, but I really am totally unaffected during a fasting day. I've been so accustomed to the sort of longer eating window that I have no issue at all doing both 1, 2, and 3 hours of exercise, or doing 1, 2, or 3 different sessions, or doing other strenuous things, for like doing public speaking engagements that require me to be sharp, or to do whatever long podcast sessions, or something that requires my cognitive abilities to be strong. And it's really against a lot of, it goes against the grain for what so many people think, that if you're not eating, you're going to be tired, you're going to be unconcentrated, you're going to have less energy, you're going to perform poorly, and so forth. I think I perform just as good or even better during a fasting day. It sort of tweaks a lot of cognitive and decision making sort of tools, I believe. And I've extended my fasting also sometimes for 2 days and even 3 days. I don't see, there's obviously there's a mute point at some stage. My goal isn't to not eat, on the contrary, but I do think, as I'm also very open with that, I do enjoy whatever I do in the way of cheating. A lot of things that I enjoy is something that I sort of see myself like I have the metabolic flexibility to eat, just because I also enjoy it. But I do think that the fasting that I incorporate is a very good balance for that. I adhere to my diet and to the philosophy that I have, pretty strictly, but I also enjoy cheating from time to time, of course. So I think fasting is a key habit that I tell basically everyone that I meet, especially if you're a middle-aged guy and older. I always try to promote fasting as a great tool for longevity, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think the jury's out on longevity, whether we're going to know what's going to happen. But certainly, I mean, there's clear data that if you're eating, if the fasting is leading you to eat less calories in that period of time, then that's going to probably be a benefit with regard to weight loss. Many people use it for weight loss. So I will say that, a lot of people will say, well, fasting is going to make me tired and irritable. And we do see that in people that are sort of chronically eating a lot of carbohydrate-based diets where they're eating every 3 or 4 hours. In that situation, if you go from there straight to fasting, yeah, you're going to feel bad. But if you shift your dietary preferences to low carb, high fat, carnivore, keto, whatever, fasting becomes much easier. You don't have the energy crises. And I wanted to ask you about, I think maybe a year ago, last year, I think it came out maybe early 2020 or maybe end of 2019. There was a nice study looking at endurance athletes on low carb diets and protein requirements, and seeing that they actually have a higher protein requirement than somebody perhaps even on a higher carb diet. Within the low carb community, we've seen a shift in the ketogenic communities now to sort of maybe steering more towards a higher protein and appreciating to include particularly animal-based protein. So what are your thoughts on protein as an endurance guy? Do you have a certain range you like to target, or what are your thoughts on protein?
I do think that a lot of endurance athletes really undershoot the need for protein, and I mean, growing up as an endurance athlete, one of the biggest problems or biggest issues was not getting sick. I mean, we have typically in Sweden, where I live on the West Coast, we have a really long, wet and gray winter. I mean, we don't necessarily get a lot of snow, but it's just really damp and dark for a long time of the year. And it's a real challenge to not get viral infections. I mean, upper respiratory infections and so forth. And as growing up as a teenager, a lot of people had these issues. I mean, 2 times every year, 3 times, 4 times. And it was almost as if it's something that goes with sports. I mean, if you exercise hard, you're supposed to get sick. It's unavoidable getting sick. And as I grew older and I became a professional athlete, I sort of felt that there was something really wrong with that notion that if you're working with your body all the time and you're investing all this time and in your performance, it should also sort of grow your health base. And that this is something at the root, at my sort of at the issue that I have with the carb, this carb hysteria that we've experienced, that people talk so much about reloading your energy levels, your energy base. And I sort of shifted and thought, what about our health base? What about reloading your sort of sources of health? Where does that come from? I mean, we're not just, it's not like you're just filling gas in your car. It's got to be a little bit more complex than that. So as I started incorporating better fats and more protein in my diet, I just stopped getting sick. And that was something that I really try to get across to everyone that I talked to and everyone that I coached. And during my professional career, I think one of the keys to my success, and I'm not a very talented athlete, to begin with. I became pretty good as an athlete just because I had the opportunity to do a lot of training. I had awesome continuity throughout my career because I basically stopped being sick. I just kept healthy all year long, every year. And I attribute that a lot to increasing my proteins and to increasing good fats. Basically from eating, animal fat, eating a lot of steak, eating a lot of eggs, eating a lot of fish. So I do think that endurance athletes, a lot of them don't realize how important it is for protein. And but also, I mean, if you're a runner, for instance, it's a very weight influenced sport. So if you can stay really, really thin, I mean, to the point where it's unhealthy thin, I would say you can run fast as long as you're healthy, as long as you can maintain some sort of balance. It's really beneficial if you stay extremely thin. I don't think it's a good long-term strategy for being healthy and strong, but I mean, it's that's how some sports, in my view, are unhealthy. Of course, I mean, if you want to perform as a long distance runner, you need to be unhealthy thin. So yeah, these days I probably consume a lot more protein than I did as a professional athlete. I've never counted my calories. I don't want to be I don't want to make eating and living too complicated. I go by two different basic rules. You know, I eat when I'm hungry and I stop eating when I'm full. I think that's a good those are good rules for me. And I try to stick to quality foods as much as I can. And when I eat, I mean, a huge steak, I eat as much as I want, and you know, I'll let my body regulate. I don't. It was a long time ago since I counted calories or macro and micronutrients.
Yeah, I'm just we've got I guess a fellow Swede in the chat asking about is there any good resources for people's sites that you listen to utilize in Sweden, because we got a lot of stuff in the U.S. but maybe not so much in Sweden. I know Andreas Enfield from the Diet Doctor is very popular in Sweden, and he's Swedish, and he's been very successful there. But again, I guess for the people listening in Sweden, we might have some. Where do you find information from?
Andreas Enfeldt, yeah, he was a really early adopter of the low carb, high fat, and his Diet Doctor has helped so many people in Sweden, and I think now they're more branching out as an international platform. But to be honest, I don't think there's a lot of good Swedish content I mean, I follow you for inspiration, and I follow Carnivore MD for inspiration. And I mean, you are the guys that are groundbreaking, and you got to realize in Sweden, eating meat is today such a sensitive topic. And if you're an outspoken meat eater, as I am, I mean, you got to be really ready to get a lot of heat from that. I wouldn't say it's super sensitive, and especially if you have a lot of solid information and argument, if you've got a lot of good arguments, but it's still a huge struggle. We have a very strong vegan community and a vegan drive in Sweden. We have a lot of vegan companies that drive their information and so forth. So it's and Sweden is, to be honest, one of the most politically correct countries there is. So it's kind of hard to get good Swedish information.
Yeah, one of the crazy things to me is Sweden, unless I'm mistaken, is a very cold country where they have a lot of winter time, and there's not a lot of mangoes and bananas growing in Sweden last I checked. And so to see how just ridiculous it is to have a recommended diet that none of your ancestors would have ever had access to, it is mind-boggling that it would be that way. I mean, when I was in Iceland, I had the opportunity to go to Iceland a couple of years ago to give a lecture, and the people got it. I mean, they understood it. It wasn't hard for them to realize that they're living on this frozen rock in a very cold place where it's not likely. I mean, they had to live on meat and milk and fish, and they might have had a little grain imported from Denmark, but it was like, by the most part, they were on a meat-based diet, and they end up having to be very, 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 very healthy people. I mean, they've got a very good longevity in their males, particularly. They've produced some of the greatest strength athletes on the planet consistently. And so to see that is kind of bizarre. Does anybody even sort of bring up that concept that, hey, we live in a place where fruits and vegetables don't readily grow?
Oh, I try to remind people a lot about that. I mean, especially if you live in the north of Sweden and you want to bring up, for instance, the environmental issues of meat, which we all know is highly exaggerated and really sort of biased depending on where you stand. But I mean, if you want to if you want to live off the land in the north of Sweden, you'll have a pretty miserable life. There is not a lot of things that you can eat and harvest when it's 25 degrees minus in Sweden. It's going to be very, very grim. So it's, I mean, but you know, but that's what happens when things become, this is not a diet, it's more an ideology, and it has a lot of political overtones, and it's and it becomes a discussion about something else completely. So I try to bring things back down to the basic, to the not, I mean, what are we talking about here? We're talking about what is good for us as a diet. I mean, as the human animal, what should we be eating, and what is making us healthy, and what is actually making us sick today? Well, it's an overconsumption of refined starches and make up modern foods, things that aren't supposed to be human foods at all, things that are really inedible, to be honest. And so and what are we facing today? We have so many kids, so many young girls eating stupid vegan diets, and they're not feeling well. They're not feeling well physically. They don't feel well mentally. They have so many issues with their own body and so forth. They never get the satisfaction of being full. They don't have any satiety from what they're eating and so forth. So I try to bring the concept back down to very basic arguments. And we have, at the same time as we have a very strong vegan sort of component in the Swedish society, we have all the major Swedish grocery stores have vegan departments, and they do vegan drives, and it's very hip to be vegan. You're a good person. You're being, I mean, I mean, there's a lot of goodness signaling from being vegan. But at the same time, we have a very strong, the older Swedish community, so to speak, a very sort of the roots of Swedish traditions is that a lot of Swedish people are hunters to begin with. So I think, I mean, per capita, there are probably more hunters in Sweden than anywhere else. And when I'm talking about hunting, I typically mean moose hunting or deer hunting. It's really, really big. And we have a lot of independent farmers in Sweden. So there's also been a growing community of sort of, I would say, business to customer sales of meat from independent farmers. So I'm part of a community where you sort of order on their Facebook site. These are all locally they have different locals communities for all these things. So I basically sign up on Facebook. I place my order. I want some milk. I want some yogurt. I want some cheese. I want some meat, lamb, blah blah blah. And then they have twice every month you meet up at a parking lot, and they all have their booths. It's like a farmer's market basically, and you pay them cash, and you cut out all the middlemen, and you know, you have the highest quality. Everything is grown within 20 kilometers of where I live. So if you want to talk about environmental factors, these are products of the best quality meats that are enforcing our biological diversity here, right here where I live. I also support the local farmers that are not subdued to any like they run their own companies, and they have higher margins, and they don't and they praise, and they have core values which they live for and by, in which they take care of their animals. And it's cheap. It's cheaper and better quality, and all links in these chains are being supported. So, you know, which is 10 times better than buying some sort of vegan sausage made up of 10 or 20 different ingredients somewhere. So these are the things that I try to communicate in Sweden, which a lot of people understand, but also a lot of people get very offended by.
I mean, it's great that you have that set up. There's different places in the world where it's available, where you can buy direct from the ranchers and farmers. I think it's wonderful. I think, you know, one thing that I think we'll see as we see some more of these cell cultured meats come online, meat will now become a health food. we will see a shift because there can be a huge profit. These companies will fund things saying that their cell meat is now suddenly healthy for humans. And now we're going to be allowed, because it's based on profit. I mean, I mean, the cynic in me is going to see that in about 5 years, we're going to see how healthy these cell cultures meats are. And suddenly their product meat is now a health food rather than something we have to demonize to create a market for that. And I think that's what we're seeing over and over again. Do you find, as far as the farming community, is that under attack in Sweden as well, like they are in some other places?
Absolutely. That is very unfortunate, and it's very sad to see. There are, they're under financial attack, first of all. Like, if you're an individual, like if you're an independent farmer, a small, like a low scale independent farmer, the financial stresses in Sweden are huge. Because first of all, we have all the subsidiaries for, that sort of make it easier for you to grow different crops and such. And we have also the European community that subsidize a lot of production, which isn't necessarily the best production. I think that for, let's say, grass-fed beef, I don't think there are any great financial gains unless you have your own sales channels. And then I mean, and it's almost in some ways in Sweden, being a farmer, especially being a meat farmer, like if you're a dairy farmer or a meat farmer, it's almost like a curse word. It's like a bad word. Like you're doing something bad, which I think is preposterous. Being a farmer is a craft. It's a craft that is going out of style. And if this agenda is driven further in Sweden, we're not going to have people knowing how to produce food in the future. I mean, we're going to have to buy everything we need from China or somewhere from Eastern Europe or something. And it really makes me very upset to see a lot of, I think it was in the news the other day. Every day, I think 5 dairy farmers in Sweden go either bankrupt or just, they go belly up. They stop doing business. So every day 5 dairy farmers disappear from the Swedish market, which means that in a few years, we're not going to have people understand. We're not going to have people to know how do we get milk? How do we raise cows? How do we sustain biological diversity? How do we sort of this knowledge will die, and it's really sad. And then we also have the very unfortunate common vegan attacks against farmers. It's not very often it happens, but it does happen, unfortunately. And they're definitely under attack in Sweden for so many reasons. But it's kind of weird. I don't understand it.
Well, I mean, some people would say there's an ulterior motive, and there's people that are trying to intentionally sort of consolidate the food supply so they can have complete control over what we eat and that type of stuff. And they don't want food sovereignty. And so that is obviously a concern of many people, the people that eat the food and also the people that produce it and depend on it to make a living. Dairy, let me talk to you a little bit about dairy. Scandinavia is a huge place for dairy. I mean, dairy has been part of that culture forever. Probably some of the highest consumption in dairy in the world is in Scandinavia. People tend to tolerate dairy very well. What are your thoughts on dairy as part of your diet? Do you find it works well with you? There's some people that just, for whatever reason, they don't do well with different types of dairy. But how do you incorporate dairy into your personal situation?
Yeah, I tolerate dairy very well, and you're absolutely right about that. This is a very dairy rich part of the world. Swedish people love their dairy, and we have so many variations of dairy. Like we'll have variations of yogurt, for instance, that people eat for breakfast. I mean, if there's 2 typical Swedish breakfasts, the one would be the special dairy that is kind of a yogurt on which people pour cereal, and the other one is oatmeal porridge. which people think is the creme de la creme of breakfasts. You know, it's the most healthy breakfast you can eat. It's oatmeal porridge. But to me personally, I've always tolerated dairy very well. I don't drink a lot of milk. I cook all my meat in butter. I do enjoy some cream, like if in my coffee I'll have some cream, for instance. I'll have some yogurt from time to time, definitely. I also, if I eat some berries, for instance, Swedish midsummer food is typically strawberries, fresh strawberries. It goes very well with whipped cream, which I think is extremely tasteful. I really enjoy it. So I'll have some dairy. I'm very I can tolerate it, and that's, unfortunately, I tolerate also everything that is pretty bad for me. I can tolerate pretty well. I mean, as a former endurance athlete, I do enjoy. I mean, that's the worst thing about carbs, flour, and sugar. It's that it often tastes very well, unfortunately. So I do enjoy it from time to time. I'm not a dogmatic person in that sense. I love a glass of red wine and such, but I also notice when I do indulge too much, I definitely notice a drop. And I talked about this at length the other day in my own podcast, that like if you maintain good solid habits with a good solid diet, without doing anything sort of extra, and you exercise a lot every day, like I do, it's, you know, you keep a decent level of feeling okay. But once you step up to being really, really serious about things, like excluding everything sugary, taking away all grains, no alcohol, you step up to a level where you actually feel fantastic. And there is a difference between feeling average, like feeling okay, and feeling fantastic. And I noticed, like, okay, so I celebrated my birthday, had some cake, and, you know, and there were a few different parties, and, you know, there's a very noticeable drop from fantastic to okay. And once habits are established again, you can step up to fantastic. So it's pretty interesting that even if you tolerate things like I do, I don't have celiac disease. I can eat everything. Like most endurance athletes, you know, you can take a lot of what do you call it? You can take a lot of punishment. You can still keep going. That's the trait of all endurance athletes. But it definitely, it has an effect on overall feeling and health. Absolutely. So even in someone so trained in sort of pushing themselves as I do, there's huge variety between depending on what I eat or not.
Jonas, let me ask you, you know, as a world champion athlete, you know, if you could go back 25 years to when you were in your peak, would you have changed the way I mean, because you won a world championship, so I mean, hey, whatever you're doing had to work. But I mean, in retrospect, would you have changed anything?
I would, absolutely. I would have altered my diet a lot more, much earlier. I would have, because I would have been able to do so much more and better training. Definitely. I would have also, I would have excluded a lot of these typical sports food from my diet from an early point on. Typically a lot of flour, typically a lot of a lot of sports food that was unnecessary at the time. And I would definitely have eaten a lot more meat from an early. I mean, I did eat. I was always a meat eater. I was always an egg eater, but I was also, up to the point where I was 25. I was also I sort of believed the notion that animal fats were bad for you, because no one had ever said anything different than that, and it was such a given. It was such a sort of a given in everything that it was hard to wrap the head around it. So I would have made these differences. I would have made those changes, and it would have made a lot of difference. And I would also, I think, probably have done more strength training at an early age than I than I did. I did always go to the gym, but I would have probably changed the ratio a little bit more from an earlier point. And you know, it's always hard to look back on those changes. I mean, it's been so much easier over the past 10 years because there's all this information is accessible. I mean, 20 years ago, it was hard to find, to be honest. I mean, this was before internet era. This was before the social media platforms came out. So it was really hard. If you were stuck in a paradigm, it was hard to get out of it. And I think, I mean, all the work that you guys are doing now opens up the world for so many people. There's knowledge out there. You see medical professionals that come out with totally different information than most doctors would, and it's really, you know, it's mind-boggling, and it gets people to think, and it gets people to reflect and to try and to test, and it means I think so much. So I'm really happy that I found the positive changes that I did at the time. I'm happy that I read the book in Fitness and in Health, and I'm happy that I was willing to sort of alter a lot of the ideas that I had that were given at the time, and I think that sort of paved the way for the relative success that I had.
Do you find, well, let me ask you, there's somebody asking a question, Marcus is asking a question about, you know, just again, with the goal being at this point, longevity, feeling good, performing well, pattern of, you know, how much do you train, what kind of training, what would a typical week look like for you if longevity and feeling good and performing well was just your goal, not competing to win the Ironman championships?
I think for me today, my goal is to do about 2 hours of different endurance activity. My typical routine these days would be stand-up paddle, swimming, and I swim in an outdoor 50-meter pool, so I get all the sun exposure. Running, I do a lot of either I do cross-country running in the forest or barefoot running on the grass, where I do like sprints and drills. And those are the 3 activities that I currently do. I would also do mountain biking, and I'm a traditional road biking and such. But so I'll try to get 2.5 hours of that every day, like a mix of that. And then I spend like 40 minutes to an hour in the gym every day, doing a variety of functional moves, agility, and just pure strength training. And that's my longevity recipe, basically. And in the wintertime, the cross-country skiing. So I mean, I try to get in between 15 and 20 hours of exercise every week, and then I do some just intermediate activities between, like I'll take my kids for a walk in the stroller, or play with my son, take a walk with the family and our dog in the forest, stuff like that. I don't count that as exercise. That's just lifestyle for me. But this is a concept that serves me very, very well, I think. And I have no ego at all. Like I couldn't care less if someone was faster than me or stronger than me or whatever. I'll just go out there and enjoy whatever activity that I can. And it's a lot of fun. It's nice to be at that point of my life. I mean, I remember going back 10 years ago when I was kind of an elite athlete, but I was also not feeling it, because I wanted to spend more time on my health. And it could be very stressful wanting to do one thing, but feeling the pressure to do something else training wise. So I'm at a much better place right now.
Yeah, I know she said Monday is your fasting day. So my assumption is on the weekend is when you maybe let loose a little bit, and Monday's kind of the time. Yeah. Is that how you kind of transition back from feeling okay to feeling fantastic again? Is you just kind of throw fast in there and then go from there?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, but yeah, it's some weekends I'll let loose a little bit more and sort of adopt to the social context that I'm in with families and friends and stuff. But sometimes it's just pretty strict living, and I still fast on the Monday, even though. But and sometimes I'll have a glass of wine or 2 on another day in the week, just because we're happening to have friends over for dinner or something. But it's like there's a nice sort of circle of how things work together in that sense. So yeah, for me, I mean, I don't have, my character isn't always super strong, so I always know that I have the fasting day to fall back on. I always know that I have my great exercise habits. I always know that I have my sort of my awesome 15 or 20 meals over the week that are really sort of thought out and ideal for me, which gives me a little bit flexibility to not sort of being what's the expression, yeah, I don't fret too much over things that I miss sometimes. Like, especially when you're with kids and family, sometimes I'll slack off a little bit, but I feel that's within the range of metabolic flexibility for me.
Yeah, and that's a great place to be, quite honestly, for some people that can do. Some people just aren't in a position where they can get away with that, unfortunately. Let me ask you about recovery. One of the things I noticed as an older guy, training, once I started reduction of carbs and went to a carnivore diet, my recovery became much better. I wasn't as sore. I slept better. I just felt better. I was able to train more frequently with a higher level of intensity. Is that something you noticed? I mean, did you find the carbs kind of beat you up metabolically and recovery wise before?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. That's for me, the difference between feeling, I mean, my levels of feeling okay compared to the levels of feeling fantastic is exactly that. When I feel fantastic, I don't have any residual fatigue, soreness, or sort of training hangover, if you know what I mean. I just feel a lot better when I wake up in the morning. Like if I have sort of my sort of semi-serious diet, there is a lot of good food, but also some slack. I'll pretty much feel like I'm middle-aged. I'll be a little bit sore when I get up. My back and my joints are a little bit sore. My test is always how I feel when I walk down the stairs in the morning. And typically, if I have a little bit too much sugar in my diet, I'll feel a lot. I will be sore around my joints going down the stairs. And when I stick to when I'm more in the 100% carnivore keto diet, it's like I cut 20 years from my age, and it's not a joke. I'm very serious, and that is really rewarding. And for me, it's been really a revelation of turning the clock back a little bit. And I sometimes downplay it to my friends or to colleagues or people that I meet, because it's it's so provoking that it just works really well. And a lot of my friends, a lot of people around me, of course, are sort of within, they sort of follow the same kind of diet. And it's something that we've all noticed that I mean, I don't have anyone around me who isn't fasting 1 day a week, and everyone agrees that it's an awesome day, and it keeps you sharp and you can perform really well. And so the step to also be in a keto zone or in the carnivore diet, it's not so far-fetched. So I do agree with you. I sleep better. I don't have the luxury of sleeping as much as I did when I was a professional athlete, but I do think I sleep better when I sleep. Like I'll do some tracking with the Oura ring, and I don't trust it completely, but compared to when I sort of compared to when I'm semi-serious, I do sleep a lot better when I'm on a strict keto carnivore diet. Like, I'll have a lot more deep sleep, first of all. I require maybe an hour or two less sleep, and I can still perform very well. And I can get up and go in the morning straight away. And that's one of the things that goes with kids. You need to get up and go straight away. Like if you're up at 6, or if you get up at 6 and plan to exercise or whatever, I mean, you can't take any sleep in, or you're going to miss your window of exercising.
Okay, Jonas, final thoughts here. We've run through an hour. Thank you so much for being generous with your time, by the way. Where do people go to sort of find out more about you, maybe some social media links? And then I guess,
Sure.
for those people that are considering a plant-based diet for whatever reasons, they think they're going to be healthier, they're saving animals or the environment, what would be a message for them, because some people might be inspired by your previous accomplishments and
Right.
what you're doing today. So where do we find you, and what would you say to some 16-year-old kid who thinks he's going to go vegan to save the world?
Yeah, and it says, and I can really sort of respect young people wanting to change the world for the better. And I try to not make fun of them or to ridicule them or anything. I think they have a very honest sort of intention with that, but I just think they're being confused. And I think the agenda, the political agenda, the political correct agenda is so strong that it's really, really hard when you're a young person and you're easily influenced, and it's really hard to sort of stand against all that pressure. And it makes me really sad, but also very upset. So I try to be like a positive influence on the other side, and showing that being a vegan has nothing to do with you being a better person for being a vegan. It has to do with you being a more confused person, and actually being a less person to think for yourself, to be an individual, to actually think critically, and to see the whole picture of things. And I try to influence people that whatever you do in terms of changing your diet, or whatever you do in terms of eating things, it's something you should do only for yourself. I mean, there is no, it's insane to think you should eat something that hurts you to be loyal to some stupid ideology. Yeah, eat things and exercise and do things that supports your health, that develops your health, that allows you to sort of develop as a human being, and so forth. And I just tried to be very straightforward and very, serious in a good way, not to make fun of people. I do make fun of the vegan community though, but I try not to pinpoint specific people. So it's a fine line to walk. But I would just say that everything in life, everything in nature, everything that is logically sort of being processed points us in the direction of eating meat, eating nose to tail, eating inner organs, eating things that makes us satisfied, that makes us get a nice sensation of being full without having the insulin rush or the sugar peak or something like that. That we can make food choices where food doesn't, we choose the food doesn't choose us. We're not a slave under things that we eat, and so forth. So these are all things that I try to communicate in my Swedish podcast. I don't do a lot of things in English, unfortunately, because my platform is a little bit too small, but I do write things from time to time in English. You'll find everything that I do under my name, Jonas Colting. And yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll do something. I've written a few books, but only in Swedish. So we'll see what happens in the future.
Awesome, Jonas. I like that. Being vegan means you're basically confused, and I think that's actually not seeing the actual big picture. You're looking at a very small slice of a huge system, feeding us and that type of stuff. And so, great. So, thank you very much. Congrats on all the accomplishments in the past, and good luck
Thanks.
in the future. Hopefully, maybe we can hook up down the road. I was supposed to go to Sweden last year, but it got shut down.
I know.
Run into you
guys.
guys.
I know. I know the guy that organized the event that you would come to, that you would have visited, and it would have been awesome. And I do hope that I'll be able to get you on as a guest on my platform, on my podcast, and that would be huge for us.
I would be more than honored to do that. Let me know. Just send me a message, and we'll make that happen. Okay, guys.
Will do. All right.
Thank you so much. We'll
Thank
see
you
you
very
tomorrow.
much.
We got Zach Bitter tomorrow. So more endurance athletes. It's endurance athlete days. Okay, guys. Have a great time. Thanks, Jonas.
Thank you very much.
Everybody. Bye now.
Bye. Thanks.